Hello, everyone. My name is Brad Shimon. I'm Chief Analyst with Omdia, looking at AI platforms, analytics, and data management. And it is my pleasure to talk to you today and bring in a colleague of mine, Arthi Garg, who is the head of advanced AI solutions and technology with the AI solutions and strategy team at HPE. Arthi, hello, how are you?
Hi, how are you? Great to be here.
Okay, so everyone, welcome. And what Arthi and I are going to be talking about today is how to basically bring ML into the enterprise at scale in a way that is both something that drives immediate value and positions the company to succeed long term. And there's a lot to cover if we were going to go through that. But what we thought we would do today is frame our conversation around a study that we did recently at Omdia, looking at the maturity of the AI marketplace and how enterprises or enterprise AI practitioners were building ML solutions within the enterprise. And so what we did basically is we asked about 150 practitioners who were engaged in building solutions. So these were folks who had already evaluated, thought about, and wanted to take it to the next step. We looked at a wide swath of industries. We also looked at this as globally. So we tried to get a good representation of what the overall market is doing with this study. And we asked folks questions like, are you experienced with AI in the enterprise? What are you using it for? What are your obstacles to deploying AI? Let's start our conversation by talking about adoption itself and how widespread it is in the enterprise. In the study that I was just describing, we found that if the AI adoption is two things. It's both widespread in terms of exposure and in terms of penetration of understanding across departments and across the enterprise, but not in use to the same degree. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. When we asked practitioners, if they were investigating use cases, 53% said they were absolutely investigating. 13% of those said they had piloted events. And that tells me that we're talking about well beyond simple proof of concept. When we asked folks, are you piloting actively? 17% outside of that said that yes, they actually had at least one in production. But when we asked those same people, of those that are in production, have you scaled them beyond one department or one business function? And the answer we got to that was a little bit surprising in that it was only 7% of the people we surveyed said that they had actually been able to scale their initial efforts. Is that what you're seeing, Artie, in the enterprise at HPE?
Yeah, we definitely see very similar trends with our enterprise customers in that, at this point, I don't think you need to convince people that AI is important and something that an enterprise organization might want to explore to sort of further their business goals. But we are seeing that customers are at various places on the journey, and there is a lot more people who have tried stuff out than have put things into production. And one of the things that we try to understand talking to our customers is what is the cause of that, and what are things. There are some things where it's just a matter of time, but I think there's also cases where there are other sort of structural issues that make it difficult to take even a successful AI project and put it into production. And we definitely are seeing that with our own enterprise customers, HPE as well.
Well said, and I think that that very much jives with what we're seeing, and the structural part is an important area for me in my research because I feel that success with AI is predicated upon having three things in harmony, and that's people, process, and platform. And if you don't, have all of those working together, you can spend all the money you want on a good platform. You can have all the buy-in from executives that you want, and you still might not have a good process to actually get that stuff working. So it's a very complicated area. So let me, actually ask you if you don't mind. I think most webinars such as ours in 2020 usually begin with a subject, but I wanted to wait till we talked a little bit about after we set the stage with people using AI, and that is the pandemic and the COVID-19 and the impact that that has had. Um, from our research, we've been actively tracking this black swan event, if you will, quite heavily, and we have been looking at its impact across a number of different industries, not just AI, but within AI itself. We've seen a very interesting phenomenon in which typically, if you look at specific industries, you'll see a total slowdown in investments. Other industries, a massive ramp up in investment, and they're typically predicated upon either opportunity or fear of loss, right? And when we looked at AI and we asked the question, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your investments in AI? It was interesting to note that it was close. About 53% of people said that their strategic initiatives wouldn't be impacted, and that really the pandemic was serving just to accelerate their plans, which I think is very high. Conversely, we saw the other half, like it wasn't there was no other group. It was simply, yeah, it's we're going full steam ahead, or we're going to accelerate. Or 45% said, well, this is likely to slow our investments, and some of them might be dramatically slowed. What are you seeing in the HPE customer base with that?
Yeah. So I think, obviously from our perspective, it's going to be a bit more anecdotal, but I think you sort of see similar patterns. And a lot of it has to do with, we often think about AI as a journey, and AI
Mm,
adoption for an organization as a journey. And so, and one of the sort of inflection points I think that organizations go through as they bring AI into their organization is really the sort of the non infrastructure things that you talked about, people and process. And that's an inflection point. It can be really hard to get over that hurdle, because if you really adopt AI into your organization, it requires process change, and it
yeah,
requires sort of rethinking how you use, how the people in your organizations, what they do and where they spend their time, and how they sort of are enabled to bring their creativity to their workplace. And so I think that what your survey found sort of tracks with what we see generally, which is that if you kind of started to get past that inflection point, if you will, then something like the pandemic may actually be accelerating AI use. We see that whether it's through some organizations that see AI as maybe a possibility to help bridge the in between period where we're a little bit more open and able to go out, but there's still concerns about the virus, and wanting to mitigate that through things like you know surveillance systems that monitor
right.
public health. And I think on the flip side, if you haven't gotten to that point, then it is really often you need a lot of time and maybe resource investment, and sometimes people coming together to think through how do we really bring how do we use AI in our organization. If you haven't gotten to that point yet, it sort of tracks that to what we see, that may slow down your investment, because you haven't gotten to the point where you've sort of overcome that first big obstacle in transforming AI from an idea to a practice
Right.
within the organization.
I don't know, Arthi. I feel like it's kind of a challenge for organizations that right now have a lot of strategic investment plans that they've made in AI versus those who have very tactical interests in AI. And I feel like the former is being held up by the pandemic and the latter is being accelerated by the pandemic?
I think that what we see is that latter category was maybe already a smaller category, at least from the enterprise perspective, in the sense that that level of really, I think what you're describing is almost like a fundamental shift in
Yeah.
how you do business. And I think that category is not a solved problem for the majority of organizations. And so anytime you have a disruption like this, on the one hand, it may increase interest in that kind of thing, but on the other hand, we still got to keep the lights on. We still got to keep our operations going. And so I think that you're right in the sense that having the time and ability to focus on truly transformational applications of AI might be a little bit slowed because of just the day-to-day problems that a lot of us are relearning how to solve. That
Mm.
being said, I actually think now that that sort of initial people are starting to take in that things have changed. I think, it might be interesting to see how things evolve in the next 6 months to 1 year, where we're no longer just trying to survive, I think, and, trying to figure out how do we get through different ways of working and thinking about, well, now we're in this new way of being. And so maybe that's something that we started to see maybe little pockets of changes in even just corporate policies around work from home. And that may have these impacts in the long run. And I don't know that we're seeing a lot of that happening right now, but I'm actually kind of interested to see. I suspect we will start to see more. And that's a hypothesis more than anything else, but it tracks to the way in general I think AI gets adopted in organizations and where we are right now.
I think our survey reflects that a bit because we fielded the survey in late April and May. So it was right in the heart of when there was a lot of fear and uncertainty going on. And you would expect then, when we asked our survey respondents, if they had faith in AI, that it was basically going to keep them afloat and say give or earn them money, make their businesses better, either through cost savings or through new areas of revenue, new avenues of revenue. And 71% of the folks we asked said they were very confident that they would get results, that AI would deliver results in the next 1 to 2 years. So not long term, very much an ROI within the next 12 months for folks. So this, I think, underscores what you've been saying in that companies are able to and are looking to focus on what they can make use of right now. I think we saw only 7% of the folks we said were not confident or didn't know what to expect. Even the other side of that pendulum, if you will, only 23% said they were somewhat confident in AI being able to deliver. So I feel like even in the most tumultuous times of the pandemic, the enterprise feels that AI is going to help them, is going to make their businesses better.
Yeah, that I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things is that we've also seen, not just in the enterprise, but just in general, because of the way that data has been used by the press and in
Mm.
other ways to help people understand this unprecedented historical event that, unprecedented, at least in our lifetimes,
Indeed.
historical event, that it actually changes, I think, it demystifies AI a little bit, in the sense that you start to see what data can do and what data can't do. And I think in a way that sort of injects a little confidence sort of into the cultural ether, if you will, so that it becomes a little bit easier to imagine what it turns it less into sci-fi and just into another thing. And I think that again, it's more of a hypothesis than something that I can say for sure. But I think that, again, that is an important trajectory with any new technology. And I think just from my own experience, becoming a data scientist, adopting methodologies, it does take a little bit of starting off with this is amazing and it's like magic, to then realizing that actually this is just applied math, and there are things that you can do with it and there are things that you can't do with it. And I think it's when you get there is when you get to the point that it's you're able to see the real possibilities. And I think that we're all experiencing that, and the use and just sort of our familiarity with various advanced analytics and other types of advanced AI techniques that are becoming just part of the national conversation, the international conversation, um, makes that a little bit easier to envision.
Agreed. And don't you feel that there, a lot of the supportive technology that goes into making an AI outcome possible has reached a level of maturity in the enterprise and our understanding of how to break down data silos, for instance, has made tremendous headway over the last couple decades, in particular with cloud native technologies. Now we seem to have come to a point of maturity in the marketplace where companies understand that data resides in a lot of different places, and
Yeah.
that doesn't mean those need to be silos. And we have a better understanding of how to use ideas like metadata and data cataloging, for instance, to overcome some of those silos and understanding our data and then putting it into practice within AI.
Yeah, I do think that there has been sort of this progression and journey that has happened specifically on the data management front. And, I mean, it's something that we see as well with our customers. And it's gone from sort of let's develop a data lake to let's sort of build out a data strategy and a data platform that means that the data may be where they reside, and let's think about how we provide the right kinds of access to it for the right kinds of problem solving, to solve the problems that you want to solve specifically. And I think it's a journey, and I think that um, my background, I am a physicist by training. And so I sort of became a data scientist because I collected a lot of data and I needed to analyze it. So to me, that sort of, and I lived the experience of having to fly suitcases of disks to other countries and carry them back because data transfer was hard at the time.
But let's if you don't mind, let's jump to talk about ML ops a little bit,
Sure.
and to actually do so by addressing the 7% elephant in the room. Yeah, why it is that even if a majority of the people of companies are using AI, that only 7% have been able to do so across different multiple use cases and departments. And I remember back in, I don't know when it was like two years or so ago, there was a Strata conference, and one of the attendees put a tweet out that said, it took me 3 weeks to make this wonderful ML model, and it's been more than 11 months, and it's still not deployed.
Yeah.
How can that possibly be? And I've been thinking about that a lot over the last while. And from my vantage point in talking to a lot of technology providers such as HPE and enterprises, is that if I were to try to like bundle it all into something manageable that I can think about, it's three things. It's repeatability, scalability, and surety. Meaning, the repeatable part is how replicable are the outcomes back to what makes good science in general. The scalability, how can I affordably and realistically train these models? How much does it cost, for instance, to train GPT-3? And how long does that take? A lot and quite a while. The answers. And then the last one, surety, can I really trust what I think, what my hypothesis is telling me? Is the null hypothesis actually right? What do we make of our outcomes? Can we trust them in production? And so I'm curious. So from your vantage point and with your history in the sciences and in thinking about how to bring ML to all of the enterprise,
Yeah.
you know, what buckets, what are the like when you try to understand it as I have, what comes to you, Arthi, in terms of what you think the biggest challenges are?
Yeah. Well, I think that, you hit upon a lot of them. So when you think about ML ops, why does it exist? Right? It's a neologism created from DevOps and machine learning. And so then you sort of unpack, well, what is DevOps? Because that itself is its own type of neologism. And I think, a lot of it goes back to, what we talked about previously, which is people, process, and platform. And I think, there's sort of almost like two different planes to look at this on. There's one plane which is what are these concerns that are going to prevent me from adopting it because I'm a little unsure about the business impact, and that's where I think the repeatability, scalability, and surety questions in. And then there's the like, okay, and then why is it hard to adopt question? Um, and so I think, we're sort of operating on both levels right now and trying to, solve the Rubik's Cube of like, what's the right combination of making it easy to implement? And then to what extent does the implementation challenges that I would say MLOps is designed to solve, because it's designed to say, take data scientists and IT organizations and maybe these, AI engineers who are sort of this hybrid of software engineers who really understand AI and implementation, get them all to work together to kind of create the people and processes for that by providing the right platform. And, but to what extent does that impact questions like scalability? Because as you talked about, there's a cost issue. So I not only do I need to be able to implement, I need to be able to do it in a way that makes sense for my business. I need to be able to do it in a way where I can address compliance concerns and anything else that, might fall under your surety bucket. And so, yeah, I think you sort of hit it on the head. And I think it's sort of an interesting thing to think about the way these two planes come together, and what technology can do and what technology can't do to help that along.
Yeah, well, what can technology do? Because like we were saying, it's not just technology, but
Yeah.
how can technology help to solve some of those problems about the people, for instance? Like, let's just start there.
Yeah.
If you think about everybody, every user role that goes into creating a successful AI outcome, you've got, as you said, the AI or ML engineers, plus the data scientists, the data engineers, the data architects, the domain experts, meaning the business experts. You
Yeah.
got the IT admins, the developers, and oh my goodness, and all of those people have very different perspectives and very different methodologies for working in their personal concerns. And you know, I guess the question I would want to ask you is there, do you believe that MLOps as a platform, as a piece of software, can actually bring those people together?
Yeah.
Is that something that we'll see is it doable?
Well, so I think that no piece of technology can force, can make people collaborate. But I think that technology can make people who want to collaborate be able to do so productively or not productively. And so I think that, as you start to define and as an enterprise starts to sort of overcome those like people and process challenges around like, hey, if we all work on this together, then we can really achieve some goal. So as you sort of create that will among the people, and you sort of create the processes, the more business processes that allow people to work together, then technology can either be a facilitator or it can be a barrier.
And we've had great software in the DevOps space now for, I don't know, maybe 5 or so years, don't you
Yeah.
think? And we've seen some really neat approaches with ideas and and platforms like GitHub, for instance, and how great that is for collaborative software development.
Yeah.
And as you say, MLOps is a neologism of the DevOps neologism. so it's squared. You know, you can't just take, GitHub and throw it at machine learning. I'd love to chat for just a second, if you don't mind, Arthi, about, you know, why that's so different from one, why the two are so different, even though we might know, that we need versioning, that we might know that we need collaboration. We might know that, we need a way to provision our environments when we build these outcomes, and be able to do that repeatably. It doesn't work the same way, does it? Between the two universes, the DevOps and the ML ops.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, like you said, there's a lot of conceptual things that are similar. And to the extent that AI solutions are implemented in code, there's sort of obvious things that I think transfer over from the DevOps world to the ML ops world. But one way that one of the things that I think is very different between the two, and means that you have to do a little bit more than just adopt DevOps tools for ML. One way to look at it is almost in the extreme. So one of the things I like to think about is that, we have a supercomputing division, obviously, of HPE. And in that world, in the sort of traditional high performance computing and supercomputing world, we develop systems for customers and communities where all of the physics knowledge about whatever phenomenon that they're simulating it's sort of baked into their code. And so the code is the most primary sort of unit of value, in a sense, because the code is how I express atmospheric physics on a computer. With AI, it's kind of the opposite, as in the code is just a thing that allows you to query the data, and the data are the observations maybe I've made of the atmosphere if I use a sort of climate or weather analogy. And so you can kind of think about it where code is sort of convergent, in a sense that, we're all kind of, the whole community is railing around a single piece of code that may be a better representation. Data it's kind of the opposite. The more data I have from the more different sources I have, the better my understanding will be of this phenomenon that we're studying. And so, I mean, when you start to think about it that way, you start to realize that you're driving in toward a sort of convergent set of shared information on the traditional computing and software driven world. But in the data driven world, you're trying to sort of manage divergent sets of data. And I think that's where there is a lot of interesting work that we're seeing happening around applying DevOps principles, like you said, with respect to versioning and different types of metadata usage. But you have to think about it very differently, because you're in a sense trying to solve a slightly different problem.
We've heard, it said many times that once your model goes to production, it's already decaying and all. I don't like to think of it that way personally. I like to think of an ML model in production as like a bonsai tree. That it's this beautifully curated work of art that exists only because you pay attention to it. How do you see that from your vantage point with ML ops? Do you feel that we have or will have tooling such that we can start to or will start to be able to treat those deployed models as more discrete entities that you just monitor to see if they drift, and if they don't drift, good job, let's go to the next? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that we will certainly have, and we already are starting to see tools that enable kind of model management, if you will. So the ability to sort of understand how well is this model continuing to represent reality based on its ability to make useful predictions from new data. And then be able to make corrections to that. But I think the bonsai analogy is kind of it's a nice visual, because I think it's a reminder that the first model we have is just the first model we had, right? And it's the reality is what it is, right? And we're just trying to capture it and follow it. And so I think that the tooling we're going to see is it is, I think, more like a bonsai than, I don't know, a French, hedge or something where you're constantly
Right.
trying to maintain the same shape. I
Right.
think
It
there,
grows.
yeah,
It evolves.
exactly. And so I think that's the difference. And I think that it takes a little time. It's a different way of thinking about things than we have in kind of the software and programming world in the past. And so I think anytime there's a little bit of a paradigm shift, it takes a little while to figure out how to think in that new way. And I
Yeah.
think I see it happening, but it's a process.
On this notion of, how do you scale AI in the enterprise, and how do you build and let your bonsai grow? I'm curious, Arthi. There's a lot of uses of AI on AI. We saw when AutoML was first envisioned by Google some time ago as a means to help data scientists pick the best neural network, more quickly and efficiently, and that speeds up development of your final outcome for sure. But we're starting to see AutoML used more broadly than that, and starting to see it do some things that I think are interesting from my vantage point, because back to the people, process, and platform, AutoML I feel like can give a broader set of stakeholders an actual stake in what's going on. That depending if the AutoML portion they're exposed to is doing something like using NLG to explain, to make transparent what's happening in a random forest, for instance, or whether it's something as simple as just an augmented decision, process to help somebody make a good decision when they're deciding, should I, bring in this data set? Where did this data come from? What's the lineage of the data, et cetera, that kind of thing. So, I feel like AutoML is one of those interesting areas that should grow beyond its roots and what it was designed to do. How do you feel about it? Do you see in HPE's customer base and internally for the engineering department there, do you folks see utility in that approach to, and I don't want to say democratize, but
Right.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean, to try to bring together a broader set of people to make better decisions.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I do in my role is spend a lot of time kind of tracking some of these trends and also what types of tools are coming onto the market. And, and I definitely think the AutoML, and as you kind of pointed out, what it was supposed to be and what it is today is that's sort of in itself a changing, an evolving thing, but to the extent sort of making it a little bit easier for people who might not be trained in machine learning and applied math to leverage some of these techniques. I think it definitely is growing and it certainly has a place. One thing that I'm seeing is that it's working the best, or it's sort of it seems to sort of gaining the most traction where maybe that AutoML is a little bit more limited in all the things that the tool can do, but it's much more enhanced by some kind of domain expertise. So if
Yeah.
I can see an AutoML platform that is like highly targeted to some, forecasting in a certain arena, or to identifying a certain maybe defect detection in a manufacturing setting, it's a lot easier to, I think, to build a reliable AutoML when it's informed by these other things and maybe also pruned, or not pruned, but
Nice. Yeah, I like that.
limited in what it can do. And so, yeah, I definitely see it. I see it as an important thing. And I think like all kinds of automation, it's going to take some time to understand what works and what doesn't work. And, because there's also that sort of intangible adoption piece and what people are going to feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
And to the extent that you might be using it in a setting where people are designing, mission critical industrial products or something like that, there's going to be a sort of different view of how and when and why they will adopt it than in something where getting the answer wrong is not as the consequences are a little bit less.
If you don't mind, I'd love to you and I bounce one last question off one another on the future. Like, what if I were to ask you, what you think is the most important next step for AI in the enterprise and to help customers build it at scale? Like, what area of investment, assuming we haven't already talked about it, or your next area that we haven't talked about, what do you think on that? What would be important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, since we've already talked about there's this, some people are much further along than the other. I think it matters a little bit who you're talking about. To me, the enterprise area, maybe it's just because of my background, but to me, an enterprise area that we're really starting to understand a little bit more, and that I think is really starting to move forward in their AI journey, is what I would call the AI enhanced enterprise. And so that's an enterprise that does something else as its primary business, what it makes industrial products or does, chemical processing, whatever it is. It doesn't do AI for a living, but AI could really allow it to meet its goals much faster. I think that one of the barriers these enterprises see is really that people one, bringing together this very, very diverse set of stakeholders, and which includes domain engineers, which includes applied mathematicians, which includes all kinds of people that are sort of more traditional software and IT related. And I think that the more that we can make it create the processes and then provide the tools to allow all of these people to work together, I think that's where we are seeing enterprises. We are seeing them invest, but I think that's also where I see the big sort of future growth area. And I don't know if that tracks to what your study shows, but it's definitely an area I am seeing and am excited to see continue to receive time and attention.
Agreed, and I do, and it does, and yeah, totally. I've started to see some really interesting work by the platform vendors or the technology vendors that have a stake in line of business solutions. That they're not trying to, give their, let's say, account reps, a Jupyter notebook. They're instead, basically building these AI outcomes into the sales enablement process itself that the sales rep never knows about, doesn't see, doesn't care about. That to me is, I think, as you say, how you get an AI infused, enabled, enhanced enterprise, and how you have, an enterprise that's therefore doing AI at scale, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah. For me, I feel like it's got to be something inside and outside the enterprise that I want to see next. And by that I mean, when you think about ideas like not just trust in AI, but ethics, the ethics of AI, and about responsibility in AI. If you build an AI outcome that could have other people's lives at stake, whether it fails or succeeds, where's the responsibility reside for that? And when we asked our practitioners if they felt that there was this gap, they overwhelmingly said, "Oh my goodness, we don't know who's responsible when something goes wrong in our AI." And I think it was like 65% of them said when we asked them should AI be regulated, they held up their hand and said, "Yep, please." somebody give us some assurance, that just as we've seen in industries like healthcare and finance, some assurance that there are protections, to make the most of AI and to prevent misuse of AI, or just something going wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And it is something I even hear from our technical team that,
Mm.
that they know. And I think one of the challenges is the technology is evolving so fast. The engineers, the AI specialists need to be part of the conversation because they're the only people who really know what's possible. And but to your point, so do a lot of other people. And I think we're just starting to ask the right questions.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, you're right. That's where knowledge comes from, and wisdom, I should say, is from asking questions. Wisdom begins with a question, does it not? All right, Arthi, thank you for doing this with me. I've enjoyed our conversation very much, and learned quite a bit today. So I thank you very much for your time, and I
Yeah.
hope everyone out there. I'm sorry to overrun you. I hope everyone out there has enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, thank you so much as well. This was a great conversation and great to sort of hear the outcome of this great study that you put together as well.
Very good. All right, everybody, take care. Have a great day. Artie, thank you again.
Thank you.